Chapter 1, Part 4, Danger. David had just vomited. It was with enough pressure even come out his nose. The lingering scent now assaulted his nostrils, but his head was clearing. He fumbled for his cell phone, but he couldn't make it work. His hands just wouldn't listen. How long had he been knocked out? He looked around, wondering if anyone else was doing any better. His head still pounded, but he was putting it back together moment by moment. His vision of the sky, replaying itself over and over. It alone cut right through the haze in his mind like a fever dream, replaying the same thought again and again. Truth. He replayed what he saw again. The DJ sighed at the temporary embarrassment of the record skip, then quickly proceeded with his art. David was drinking heavily and already again lost in thought as the crowd partied the night away. We're all so incomplete, and reaching out to fill those gaps, David thought as he walked through the crowd in a haze. He watched two of Luke's friends try to fit a large forked log onto the fire pit. Probably too large for the pit, he thought to say something, but just couldn't muster the energy.
Wow.
And then the record scratched again. The lights flickered as the music restarted and then again ground to a halt. The power went out, and in the sudden darkness and silence of the backyard, the crowd began to mumble. The music did not return. Someone shouted how the power went out, and the crowd threw taunts at the DJ for it, but no one truly cared. The laughs continued, the jibes continued, the self-promotion, the sarcastic one-liners and flirtatious retorts all continued over the sudden darkness. Some people gathered closer to the fire pit. Despite the dark and the silent music, the booming sounds continued, then grew. At first, only a few noticed. The ground trembled for just a second, this time without the help of the large speakers, and more took notice. The booming came closer, got louder, and the ground shook more. Conversation ceased, and commotion began in the crowd. Then the festiveness was replaced by a sudden panic. David felt a herd-like instinct rising in the crowd. They felt the sudden hint of genuine danger, like the sudden sharp and rude smack in the face. It dispelled any other thought process. The rising panic threw the crowd further into confusion. Others in the crowd sensed that sudden panic and transmitted the sensation to others. David saw a feedback loop, the amplifying genesis of terror with no method of diffusion. It collected, peaked, and boiled over, overriding conscious action and spilling over into others. David studied the effect and was amazed at the clarity he could see it unfold. Yet he too was part of this herd and was held in thrall. He could only watch the synchronized reactions welling in those around him. He felt the amplifying fear and watched as all logic and awareness in that moment was lost in a torrent from the unknown assault on their senses. He felt all of this, the rising fear and reflex, yet a part of him stayed in reserve simply to observe the hysteria overflow into realization. And in that moment, when small blue streaks appeared across the sky, the terror was confirmed and a realization was unanimous. We are in danger, David thought, as did the rest of the crowd. Something needed to be done, he screamed internally, but what was it? Everyone else seemed frozen too. Were they all so overcome with awe to be able to think? The streaks made hisses and burning sounds as they forked and descended toward the ground. The terror in the crowd was a flash flood. It was palpable, yet David saw no one move. There was no time for panic to escape, no time to understand, there was no time to do anything. A small dot hovered past the clouds and David stared, knowing he should run but was unable to take his eyes off it. All became horror and pain. His thoughts gave way to the highest pitch sound, a hum that overrode everything. Pupils strained, trying to constrict to protect against the light, but instead dilated as small, countless more dots turned into a firestorm of brilliant blue miles wide far up in the sky. His body locked up, and he felt himself hit the ground. The dot exploded in a nova of light, and the ground started to shake. Now David was covered in vomit and trying to make sense of it. He had replayed the memory over and over, and was lost somewhere between then and the now, unsure how long ago it was. It might have happened ages ago, and he'd have not noticed. Such was the sheer power of the image that he replayed, it completely overruled the rest of his mind. Every time he relived the explosion, his head began to violently ache, but the image was so precious to him he didn't care. He noted that he was in pain all over, and some part of him managed to deduce the event could not have been too long ago. He took a weak breath of air in. His body screamed for more. He forced himself to breathe in ragged heaves as he desperately tried to think about anything else. The appeal to not move again, to not attempt another breath and just drift back to sleep dreaming of that beautiful sky and the truth it offered was tempting. But a sudden fear struck him that if he drifted off, he might not be able to breathe again. David heard sobbing. Someone was nearby, but he couldn't see them. He needed to move. Hairs on his neck spiked like needles as he tried to stand. The world spun as an added treat. He also felt some kind of tearing in his back. It screamed as he forced himself to stand upright. He made a note of the fire pit. The large forked log was still burning, though had half melted away into charcoal and ember. It couldn't have been out for too long. Half an hour, maybe. An hour at most. "Hello?" He choked on the words and was too busy coughing up bile to hear any response. He was still trapped in that half-awake daze, like a fever that keeps replaying a half-formed thought as one futilely tried to regain sleep. He finally stood fully upright, and his back screamed in agony. He definitely had torn something. Aside from that very vivid pain, the rest of him was almost numb. All about him were people. Most were doubled over, still unconscious. He heard groans of pain in different directions. Lightning hissed above, and David found himself staring up to the skies, whispering again. He felt a trickle of blood dripping down his nose, but just didn't care to wipe it. He found it odd that things were so visible in the dark of the night. The fire cast a red glow, but that did not explain why suddenly everything had such clarity to it, like the difference between an old television from the 70s and the modern-day ultra-high-definition brands. He felt the rolling bolts of blue above, and the redundant thoughts returned. It was truth. He paused for a moment and realized he had spoken aloud and that his words were slurred. I must be dreaming. Yes, that's the only answer. Red beams darted across the sky every few moments. It crisscrossed the blue lightning as it seared across the clouds. These bursts of light were nothing like the first explosion that was so burned into his mind. By comparison, they seemed synthetic. The pinpoints of red and the dots of blue lightning would originate somewhere high up in the heavens and then race off to some unknown destination far away. He had never seen true chain lightning, but he would describe it very much the same. Knowing how to describe it did nothing to help understand what was going on, though. All he knew was just how at home it felt. He took in a huge gasp of foul-smelling air and stood upright again. This time there was significantly less pain involved. A somber thought occurred. Where are the sirens? Why is it so quiet? He took a long, clear breath, the first that wasn't a ragged jumble of necessity. Then he had the first and only logical thought to yet come to his mind. Holy shit! He slurred this aloud too. It was then something caught his eye, an orange glow in the windows of his home, candlelight. David looked to the windows and cursed as his thrown-out back began to spasm in pain, but he managed to begin the slow and painful hobble to the back door. Thank you for listening to this enhanced audiobook. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you can't wait to find out what happens next, the full novel, A Dark Age Resurgent, by Michael J. Grasso, is available on Amazon.com. Links are in the description.